So in part one, we learned about the fundamentals of how to get started with XD. And in this video, we'll take a look at layers and groups. Here's the project we started. And the first thing I want to do is to name this artboard. Eventually, we'll end up with many artboards. So we want to keep things organized. I'll double click on the title and I'll just call this Home for Homepage, or the homepage of an application. And again, I'll scroll out with Control and the scroll wheel. And then I can pan by holding down the scroll wheel and moving the mouse around. And this is our only artboard right now. So looking at these three icons down here, we want the middle one, which will give us our layers. When I click on that, the first thing we see is the list of artboards in our project. Right now we only have Home, so I'll double click that. And that brings us to layers. Currently we have three layers: Rectangle 1, which we see as the rectangle on top, My App, which is the text, and Rectangle 2, the rectangle on the bottom. And one of the big differences between a professional designer and someone who's just dabbling around is that if you ever get a professional design, all of these items should be named properly. So let's take Rectangle 1, and that's our heading, so I'll name that heading. To change the name, you can either double click on it or right click and choose Rename right here. And the Rectangle 2 is actually the footer. And My App, let's just call that the logo for now. So a good rule of thumb is that whenever you add some kind of element, give it a name in the Layers panel right here. Now, one problem we have is that we want the heading to be a single group. If we take this and drag it around, you can see that it leaves the text behind. I'll hit Control Z to undo that. So what we want to do is we want to group together our heading and the logo. So I'll shift click and select both of those. Then I can right click and select Group, or press Control G. And now we have Group 1. If we open it up, you can see our heading and logo. And the benefit of grouping is that now we have both of these items, the text and the rectangle, in one piece. And they can move as one and we can control them as one. Now we want to make sure our naming is correct. So instead of heading, this isn't the full heading now. This is just the background. So I'll just put BG for background. And Group 1 is now the heading, so I'll rename this. Now when it comes to grouping, it's important to understand the order in which items are placed. For example, what if we take the logo and place it underneath the background? We can see that it disappears. So the way to think of this is that if it's on top of the list, it will show on top in our design. Logo needs to be on top of BG, the background. That way we can see it. And there's no overlap between our footer and our heading, so that won't have any effect if we rearrange those. So let's say our footer is actually a status bar. Let's go ahead and add some text to that. I'll enter some text, hit Escape and resize it, hit V to get our selection tool and move it into place. And I can use the up and down, left and right arrows on the keyboard to position it more exactly. I'll make it white. And I don't like the boldness of it, so let's take off the bold and we'll just leave it normal, regular. Okay, so we just added this text element, but we need to add it in the right place. I'll move it down next to footer, and I'll shift click these, and I'll make a group. I'll right click and select Group, or Control G. And I'll rename this to Footer. And I'll rename footer here to BG as the background of the footer. And to see that it's grouped, we can just drag this around and see that the text does move with the rectangle. Now if we open up the heading, let's say we wanted to add a rectangle. I'll place it here, but you can see that the rectangle actually got placed outside of the heading. So we need to drag that in. I'll hit Escape and V to get our selection tool, and now we can see that that rectangle is part of the heading. And we don't need this as part of our design, so I'll just click it and delete it. Now when you click into a group, your first click will select the whole group. But if you wanted to narrow in and select a member of the group, you have to click again, and you can select the text. And you can see by this light blue bar where we are. We've got the logo selected. So again, to get to these layers, you go to this layer icon right here, and you can toggle that panel on and off. And we can open up the folders, and it's always a good idea to give a name to everything, because other people looking at our design will really appreciate and have a better understanding of what's going on.